afternoon once again. Welcome to our last session of today's special workshop hosted by the African Wildlife Economy Institute based in Stellenbosch University. We would like to thank all the guests from attending and staying with us since morning today. And also I would like to welcome those that are just joining us now. So we have had a long discussion today. We have shared a lot of insights and focusing on different, sorry, I just lost electricity here. I hope the network will stay on. Load shedding everywhere. So we have touched on quite a number of issues from morning. We started about looking into the biodiversity economy of different countries. Particularly, we looked into Zimbabwe's biodiversity economy and policy implications, what the government in Zimbabwe is trying to do to build its wildlife economy sector or biodiversity economy sector. We also had the presentation that we got from Letitia, who was giving us insights into what South Africa is doing in developing the wildlife economy or the biodiversity economy. And then that was followed by our session, which our first session, which is the first workshop, which delved into the wild meat sector. We got to learn a lot about the value chains in the wild meat sector. How can we generate income streams from protected areas? And we had also our second workshop, which focused on the tourism. How do we encourage, or how do we move in the direction of inter-Africa tourism? And how do we get Africans to visit each other? We looked into that, and we had different speakers giving us different views and different lessons in research and also from practice. Our last workshop touched on the liberalization or liberalizing trade in wildlife products, which was our last workshop, which was chaired by Dr. 𝐂𝐨𝐬𝐞 𝐂𝐨𝐧. We touched on the lessons that have been learned from the South African wildlife economy. What will that mean for other parts of Africa or for other countries in Africa? We also touched on how to rewild using the wildlife enterprise, the topic which was presented by Dr. Francis Forbes. So we also touched on the critical steps for encouraging inter-Africa trade. This was presented by Dr. Biandri. We also had the last presentation in our last workshop, which was presented by Dr. Howard Hendricks on the Africa wildlife economy and looking into closer to reality, where he touched a lot around the community involvement and practice. So ladies and gentlemen, this is our last session, which is the panel discussion. I will be joined here by three speakers or three experts. I will introduce them. The first one will be Dr. 𝐂𝐨𝐬𝐞 𝐂𝐨𝐧, who is an AWARE research fellow, senior researcher, sorry, and also a senior researcher again for Center for Sustainable Transition here at Stellenbosch University. Dr. 𝐂𝐨𝐬𝐞 𝐂𝐨𝐧, may you unmute yourself and also show your face. We would like to see you for this conversation. Thank you. We also have Professor Joseph Mbaiwa, who is also an AWARE senior fellow and who is a director at Okavango Research Institute in Botswana University. So Prof. Joseph Mbaiwa, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, you're welcome. We also are joined by Dr. Tadu Rusoke, who chaired our second workshop. He's a senior fellow here also for the African Wildlife Economy Institute, and is also a lecturer in Kumba University in Uganda. So ladies and gentlemen, I would like to encourage you to start putting your questions down and also developing some comments or insights that you will want to have from our speakers. And I will give them first a chance to introduce themselves in about 5 minutes and also give a reflection of the day. So this session will be touching more on what we have talked about. from the morning all the way to now. And also we are going to open the floor for everyone to ask questions, and we have a discussion in that order. So I would like to give Dr. Haley an opportunity to share with us the reflections of the day today and also give an introduction of herself. Dr. Haley, over to you.
Thanks very much, Wiseman, and hi everybody. And yeah, thanks very much for sticking with us throughout the day, and just to say how much I really enjoyed the depth and diversity of conversations and insights that we learned today. So thanks very much to all those that have contributed as speakers, but also in the really, I think, rich discussions. So as Wiseman said, I am a researcher at Stellenbosch University. I've been at the Center for Sustainability Transitions for quite some years, and I've now recently joined the African Wildlife Economy Institute, which is really exciting to me because it's directly aligned with my core research interest of how do we unlock just and sustainable wildlife economies across the continent. So a lot of my work is kind of focused on building the evidence base for understanding what are the requirements for investing in wildlife economies and getting viable enterprises off the ground, and also to try and articulate and provide evidence for their socioeconomic as well as conservation contributions. And I now also have a project looking at trophy hunting impacts across the continent. So just to reflect on the day, just a question for you, Wiseman, because you also sent me a more specific question. Would you like me to answer that now, or first you'd like just some general reflections?
General reflections, then I'll come to you with the question. Thank you.
So I think, yeah, I think a general reflection for me is that it's very important for us, you know, coming back, I think, to the last talk of the day, which I really appreciated, like a bit of a reality check. You know, I think it's important for us to appreciate context when we're talking about wildlife economies. And I think, you know, already we have like this incredible diversity of people and contexts that are part of this conversation. And it's important for us to remember that, because I think, you know, there's general lessons to be learned, and those are valuable, but we can also learn a lot from each other's context. And we shouldn't overlook context when trying to understand what will work where and why, recognizing that cultures are different, countries are different, and people are also at different, or countries are at different stages of unlocking wildlife economies. And I think the other thing that really struck me is that kind of, I think, came through multiple times throughout the day, and again, you know, really resonated in the final presentation, is the question of, we talk about, you know, unlocking African wildlife economies, but why do we want to do that? And I think it's important that we don't forget that, you know, that fundamental. And I think, you know, what came through the day is the why here is really because it is an opportunity for African countries to develop in ways that are sustainable, that are resilient, and also that are just. So, you know, I think it's very much about conserving Africa's unique wildlife and thinking about ways to do that, not just the species, but the habitats. And that came through, I think, strongly throughout the day. But it's also very important to hear about the people, and how do we make sure that wildlife and economies are inclusive, and that they become a livelihood for people that enables them to also be resilient in a changing world. You know, so Africa is going to be one of the worst hit continents when it comes to climate change. A lot of areas already are quite marginal for agriculture. So, you know, I think it's important to center people in the conversations of questions of why, which again comes back to my first reflection about the importance of considering context when we think about unlocking wildlife economies. Thanks, Wiseman.
Thank you so much, Haley. I think you are raising some of the important points when you talk about reality check, especially looking into the last speaker who talked about how do we then take ourselves into reality. Do we always want to develop strategies and not implement them? Do we always want to come up with ideas? How do we get them to actually be operational on the ground? Looking into the communities, for example, I think it's one of the topics that has been coming up. How do you get communities involved? How do you bring about equity. So we'll chat more on that as we proceed with the discussion. Dr. Tadu Rusoke, this is your opportunity to share with us and also reflect on today's insights or contributions that came from the different speakers. You may choose to touch more on the tourism sector or what is happening in Uganda and East Africa. Over to you, Dr. Tadu.
Yeah, thank you so much, Wiseman, for the opportunity and making me part of this panel. I'm lucky that early in the morning, there wasn't much noise. I'm at the university and there is a football match going on. So if you get some disruptions in terms of noise, I'm sorry about that. I have tried to locate my headsets, I can't get them. But otherwise, I'm privileged to be here and to be part of this panel of eminent experts in wildlife economies. I'm just learning wildlife economics. I come from the conservation background and specifically on specializing in biodiversity livelihoods and designing interventions for human-wildlife coexistence. So those are my areas of specialty. And I have about 14 years of experience in the conservation sector. I'm really pleased to be part of this evening's panel. So maybe talk about tourism, intra-Africa tourism, like we have already discussed. It is important for us to get Africans visiting one another, if I should put it in simple terms. But as it has been already elaborated by most of the panelists or presenters, we are having a lot of barriers to achieving this. And whereas there is the goodwill in terms of maybe policy shift at the continental level, like when you look at the African Free Trade Continental Area, it is part of the 2633 agenda of the Africa that we want. But definitely to achieve this, we have to come together as Africans, put our heads together, get institutions to work, get experts on board, build synergies, and achieve this. But at the end of the day, if we don't do that, then basically that will remain maybe nicely written on the paper, and we are not achieving any outcomes. So the issue of waiving actually off visa fees for all Africans, I think is critical for us to move. And countries which have done this really receive a lot of tourists. I want to give a very simple example of Hong Kong. Ugandans are free to travel to Hong Kong, at least for the first 3 months. If you go beyond the first 3 months, then there you are made to pay. But I mean, like, they are getting a lot of tourists because it is a visa-free country. They are getting a lot of tourists because it is a visa-free country. And I know you have very many countries here across Africa, Zambia, Botswana, and others. They are also, Ugandans can travel there free without paying any visa. But like Professor Mbaiwa put it, if you are assuming you are transiting from one country to another, whereby one country is required to pay a visa until you reach your destination, you'll find that you have to lose a lot of money to access your final destination. Then maybe the other challenge which needs to be addressed from the very practical bit of it is the issue of air travel. We are still having very few domestic flights, if I can say, within East Africa. And also, if I must connect from here, maybe to Lagos, it may take me like 2 or even 3 days to connect to Lagos, but you can imagine it is not very far, but we are within Africa. So when we are talking about issues of mobility across Africa, we need to see more maybe direct flights, say from Entebbe, where I am here in Uganda, to Lagos. And I would like now to upload my home airlines, the Uganda Airlines. They at least now they have started a direct flight to Lagos. I think it is once a week. And those are the efforts which we want to see across all the countries. Then we have talked about the visa fee, maybe to go back briefly. Rwanda has already led the example. And like we said, they have waived off visa fees for all Africans coming to Rwanda. And we are still having challenges to deal with marketing. Now, some of you support football. It is quite interesting when you see Ugandans donning jerseys for Arsenal, and they are written on Visit Rwanda. So I must say I'm ashamed as a Ugandan. We are not doing a lot when it comes to marketing. We are not doing a lot when it comes to international marketing. So you limit Ugandans wearing their jerseys of Arsenal written on Visit Rwanda. How about Visit Uganda? So we need to see demonstrated goodwill from our governments, promote and market our countries in terms of tourism. So all these are some of the issues which we need to look at. I don't know if you still want me to carry on. You know, it has like elaborating a lot, but I could still come back. For now, I think allow me to highlight that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tadu, for those insights. I think what I picked from your contribution, you are talking about Africa linkage. You're looking at the transport, and also we are delving more into how do we market our tourism sector to each other. But we'll come more on that. And to the guests online, I would like to invite you to start preparing your questions and also raising your hands before I move on to Professor Joseph Mbaiwa to also give us an introductory comments based on what has happened today and the reflection. Prof. Joseph, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me apologize before I start. My house is just next to the airport. So in the event that you hear some airplanes making noise for you, kindly forgive me for that. Having said that, maybe as an introduction, I've been in the tourism research for a while. I do have qualifications in tourism development and especially wildlife-based tourism, environmental management, natural resource management. So I've been doing research in this area for some time now. And what I've seen is that when you talk to an African about tourists, the first thing they think of is some international tourists coming from Europe or the Americas. Actually, in Botswana, it's very interesting that you'll find us talking about Makhoa. Makhoa means the whites. So when we refer to tourists, we are referring to whites from Europe, whites from America. And when I travel myself in Botswana, I'm not regarded as a tourist because I'm not white. So you can see that we have come up with stereotypes of who is a tourist and who is not a tourist. And I think this is because of the fact that most of the tourists that we receive in our respective African countries are from the developed world, international tourists. And we never expect a Black person or an African to visit another African country. So which is actually, I don't know whether I can say it's a mystery or what, but I think time has come for us to look into this thing and work on it and ensure that Africans travel within Africa. And we refer them as tourists. If at all you are to refer to me as a Lokhoa when I'm out there, then it's fine because I'll happen to be visiting. So we need to remove the barriers that make it difficult for Africans to travel within Africa. Like I said earlier in the morning, it's very interesting to find that maybe if you want to visit West Africa, you might be forced to fly into Europe first before you fly to West Africa. Simply because of the air connectivity which is not okay. You might be forced to fly to Dubai, flying Emirates, and then fly back with Emirates to West Africa or to Central Africa, which is not okay. And you are coming from Southern Africa. I think we need to work on those and remove the barriers. We need to work on our visas so that a visa should not be a deterrent that makes someone not to travel. More especially that we are in the same continent. We also need to work on issues of the media reporting on Africa. I think it has been bad for a very long time. I remember President Trump, when he was campaigning, I think he didn't have good words for us as Africans. He was calling us all sorts of names. I think time has come for us to work on those. And yes, there are challenges. Challenges will always be there. But I think the reporting on Africa should not only focus on the negative aspects, on the negative parts. We should focus on the positive aspects as well. I'm not saying we should not report the negatives. What I'm saying is there should be a balance. There are beautiful landscapes in Africa. There are beautiful, tourism products in Africa, which I think we can promote very well. So we need to remove those. These are some of the things that we talked about in the morning.
Yeah.
One of the things that.
Yes, you want to continue? You can continue.
Okay, I'll just say one last point and then I'll stop.
Okay.
Africa, especially when it comes to trophy hunting, we have differed amongst ourselves. You look at what East Africa is saying in terms of trophy hunting. Kenya, for example, they are not promoting trophy hunting at all. Tanzania next door is promoting trophy hunting. And then you come to Southern Africa. All of us, we are saying in Southern Africa, trophy hunting should be undertaken. There is a recent study that was done by CAZA, which showed that Southern Africa, or the CAZA states, have got about 227,000 elephants, of which over 60% of those reside in Botswana. That is over 133,000 elephants reside in Botswana. And when you have such a massive elephant population, really, I mean, the trophy hunting that we are saying Botswana should undertake doesn't do a dent, because in a year, we eliminate about 400 elephants. It doesn't do any dent to the elephant population. Elephants multiply at a rate of about 7.2% per annum. The mortality rate is very low. So really it doesn't do any dent to that. So I think when it comes to media reporting, we also need to reflect on these things and then talk about this, because trophy hunting is one of those areas where, because in Botswana it is done in marginal areas which are not good for photographic tourism. You end up in a situation whereby trophy hunting sustains rural livelihoods, especially those communities who are living in those wildlife areas. So photographic tourism and trophy hunting, they complement each other. There was a question in the morning to say, when are we going to have Africans as trophy hunters? Because most of the hunters come from Europe. That is a tough question. Trophy hunting,
I would love you to delve into that question a bit more as we go with the session. So,
okay, thank you.
Yeah, because we need to discuss that in a bit more detailed way so that people can also start to interact with us. I would like to invite people to start putting across questions, but I will also just give each and every speaker here an opportunity to respond to one of the questions that I've prepared here for them. I will start with you, Dr. Haley. The wildlife economy approach is gaining traction across the continent, as noted in our key note speakers from the Zimbabwe and also South Africa. There is a real potential for conservation and developing this wildlife economy using the wildlife enterprise. So if I may ask some questions, what are the key ways in which African governments could enable or perhaps support some of these initiatives that are aimed at developing the wildlife economies? I know that you have done quite a lot of work around this area, and you can perhaps give us insights, what you have learned in the process. Over to you, Hayley.
Yeah, thanks, Wiseman. I'll share my own insights, but also I think, it's nice to reflect on what we learned about this from today. And, I think a really common theme, and one which I full-heartedly agree with, is the importance of how governments enable wildlife economies through enabling policy. I think we time and time again hear how policy does the opposite in terms of the wildlife economy space. And I think, fundamentally, we heard today about the importance of devolving property rights to the people on the land with the wildlife. And property rights here means, rights to use, and in some cases even own, the wildlife. But it's also about the land, rights around the land, which enables people to use that as an asset to attract investment, etc. So I think, the countries where we see larger wildlife economies are those that have devolved property rights more. That, of course, can come with, other outcomes like intensification and things that we have to deal with. But, I think really at the foundation here, governments need to enable wildlife economies through supportive policies. So I think that that's really critical. And linked to that, I think, is this idea of supporting wildlife economies through incentives as opposed to regulation. And I think what we see in many cases is that how governments respond to wildlife enterprise is through regulation, as opposed to other sectors where governments really appreciate their value to the economy, and they provide a lot of incentive or enabling support, for example, in agriculture, etc. And I think the issue we see with wildlife economies is maybe in some ways a kind of artifact of the way wildlife is viewed globally in terms of conservation. That also came through, I think, many times today, this kind of perspective of wildlife is, wildlife needs to be protected, needs to be conserved, as opposed to, I really liked Jeanette Cellier in her talk had this statement that wildlife, instead of things to protect, should be seen as assets to be deployed in socioeconomic systems. And so I think that, many of the ways in which African governments and governments around the world currently regulate conservation and wildlife is through restriction and what you can do with it, as opposed to thinking about, well, how do we actually incentivize this as a sector to enable it to grow, and then we wouldn't have to have all these restrictions on how wildlife gets used, etc., because it wouldn't be threatened. So I think that kind of shift in mental model is really important for governments. And then I guess linked to that, and some of the work that we've been doing is in the space of actually articulating the value of wildlife economies, because I think in many cases governments don't always appreciate that. We heard some good examples this morning about South Africa as a wildlife economy or a biodiversity economy strategy. Zimbabwe has now taken steps to recognize that they need a new strategy to unlock the biodiversity economy. So countries are coming around to appreciating it, but I think, in many cases, there isn't an appreciation for really the huge potential of the wildlife economy. And so I think, it would be helpful if governments can start to appreciate that. And I think one of the ways is through actually the collection of baseline data. I think when it comes to the wildlife economy, and that came through the talks today as well, we don't even know what are the stocks necessarily, what are the impacts in terms of jobs, what are the impacts in terms of food security, what are the impacts in terms of rural economies, etc. So I think governments can also enable through policy the collection of that data that actually articulates and demonstrates the value of the wildlife economy, that enables it to be better appreciated and therefore unlocked. And I think my final point around that is that information also speaks to investors. We need investment in the wildlife economy. Governments have a crucial role in attracting investment through articulating the value of the wildlife economy, but also through having being investment ready and creating kind of appropriate national environments where investors, particularly foreign investors, feel comfortable to invest. So I think, there's a real key role for governments there, and also channeling investment into the wildlife economy. I'll leave it there for now. Thanks, Wiseman.
Thank you so much, Hayley. Hayley, they are highlighting to us what the governments can do, looking into the investment or collection of data that is building a stronger database for wildlife economies or the practices that are in the wildlife. Who is there? What is involved? Who gets to get what? How can people benefit? And the different types of investment schemes that the governments can introduce into the sector. The similar way we see the support with the conventional agriculture, or should I say agriculture, all these grants that are given to the sector in the agricultural sector. All those are some of the issues or some of the support mechanisms that the government could at least employ to develop and support the wildlife economy sector development. Then I will move on, colleagues. If you have a question directly directed to Hayley on what she just said, feel free to raise your hand and also drop it on the chat box. She will be ready to respond to the questions. In the meantime, I'm not seeing any hand here or in response to what Hayley has just said. So we'll move on to the second question that will be directed to Dr. Tadu Rusoka. Dr. Tadu, tourism is a major part of Africa's wildlife economy. As you can also, you remember that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 biodiversity economy also speaks a lot around that, including the South African one. And in East Africa, it's a very common trend to focus more on tourism. So as our workshop highlighted, this includes the photographic tourism, hunting tourism, as well as other tourist activities. There is now a real potential to grow the sector by focusing on inter-Africa trade, which Prof. Mbaiwa commented on a bit earlier. This could be including photographic safaris, hunting, fishing expeditions, and so forth. So what can African governments do to encourage more inter-Africa tourism? I think Prof. Mbaiwa was already touching on that, on how we can talk of inter-Africa trade. And you also raised some of the points earlier on of how inter-Africa trade could be encouraged. There was one last point that Dr. Prof. Mbaiwa raised on how do we get local people or indigenous communities to also participate and be active in the hunting sector, and also looking into the inter-Africa tourism. Over to you, Tatu. If you need a bit of clarity on the question, please say so. I might have said a lot of things.
I'm good with the question. Now, let me start with the last one. How do we get more indigenous people participate in tourism? Let me take an example of Uganda. Previously, we have been having indigenous communities who are living within some forests, say in Wind Impenetrable National Park. We used to have a group of people called the Batwa or the Pygmies, who used to live in this forest, but later at some point they were removed from the forest and integrated into the main communities. Now, one of our major tourism products is what we are calling the Batwa Trail or the Pygmy Trail. Now, tourists come and, okay, unfortunately, maybe I can say majorly from outside Africa, participate in the Batwa Trail activities. And the Batwa, or this particular group of people, try to perform the indigenous practices on how they used to live in the forest, how they can make fire in the absence of maybe a lighter or matchboxes. They can perform for you all that type of activity that they used to do while living in the forests. So unfortunately, like, okay, this is still tourism. In Uganda, the other bit of directly harvesting wildlife resources, which includes maybe getting game meat and the like, it is not well developed. And if it is there, then it is very illegal. It is illegal wildlife trade, which is happening. So we are having very few professional hunters who are coming in to involve the local communities. But in this case, I would like also to speak to one of the pilot projects which is taking place around Lake Imbro National Park, where we are having professional sport hunters. They are coming in and they are given quotations, given licenses, harvest some wildlife. But still here, our senior colleagues maybe could talk on the issue of value chains, because here the interest of the sport hunter is basically to get a trophy, maybe a horn or a skin, but the meat is just given to the local communities to feed on. So we are still lacking when it comes to issues of value addition. But though your question was somehow inclined to indigenous communities, but at least when it comes to direct harvesting of wildlife resources, Uganda actually can say we are in the baby stages. Then I also want now to speak about Matron Falls National Park. And I would like to invite all those who are in the workshop today to come and visit Uganda and practice sport hunting for actually in line with the fisheries. So you can do sport fish hunting on the Nile. And as you all know, the River Nile is one of the 7 wonders of Africa. So we are getting a lot of tourists coming in to do sport hunting of fish. You just get the Nile parts from the Nile, you measure it and return it back into the water. So that activity is picking up, but of course for a few affluents. Then I want to talk to the issue of photographic safaris. And it's good that most of our speakers are coming from Southern Africa. We are getting a lot of wildlife photographers from South Africa. Maybe at some point I will share some statistics, but it is now a trend. We are getting a lot of wildlife photographers. And maybe what I can tell those who are attending this conference and the whole world at large, it is important to incentivize tourism. Why? Now, most of these photographers who come to Uganda and East Africa in general have been able to be recognized in terms of wildlife photography awards. And I think the last 3 days, there have been the Benjamin Mkapa Wildlife Photography Awards taking place in the United States, in Wyoming State, in the United States of America. And many photographers have been recognized. So the more we move to incentivize conservation, subsidize conservation, of course, for tourism, because we're talking about wildlife-based tourism, I think in the long run, we will see more tourists coming in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tatu. On that note, I'll move now to the third question to Prof. Joseph Mbaiwa. Professor Mbaiwa, bans on trophy hunting or on the export of trophies in countries like Zimbabwe, Tanzania, and Botswana, in part, can be such a negative impact on conservation and livelihoods because it is one of the limited number of wildlife exports from these countries. Based on the workshop on liberalizing trade, it opens a discussion for us to look into the diversity of these wildlife goods and services that could be produced and traded within the continent and even outside. Should these countries that are facing the ban for trophy, should they start to think of alternative income streams, or how could these trophy bans affect the livelihoods and also the economy or the wildlife economy in these different countries? And how do you see this happening? If you can give examples as well, that would be interesting. Over to you, Professor Joseph. I hope you got the question.
For the delay. Yes, I
hope
did.
You got the question. Okay. All right. Over to you.
No, yes, I agree with you that maybe time has come that countries involved in trophy hunting should diversify the business. Diversify it in the sense that, like what the previous speaker said, when a trophy hunter comes to Africa, they're interested in the trophies, either the tusks or the skin. They leave the meat. Maybe the time has come for us to collaborate with some of these companies so that we make use of the meat. Usually, this meat will be taken to the villagers, and the villagers will be left to feast the whole day, the whole night. But I think we can make use of that. In Botswana, for example, we were a beef producing country. We sell our beef to Europe, to the EU. Why can't we have factories which are producing meat from the bush? Be it canned meat, buffalo meat, elephant meat, whatever meat, being sold locally, even being sold outside the African continent. Initially, I talked about the elephant population in our region, Southern Africa, to be very high, especially in Botswana. Why can't we have a situation whereby we make use of these elephants? We make use of the meat. I live in Botswana, but whenever I want meat from game meat, for example, I get it in Namibia, 𝐓𝐡𝐞. But in Botswana, it's very rare to find, but we have a lot of this wildlife. Why? Yes, in 𝐓𝐡𝐞, a bit of it in 𝐓𝐡𝐞, there's a town in Botswana called 𝐓𝐡𝐞, close to the Namibian border. You can get that, but it's very limited. So we can diversify into this value chain thing. We can diversify into that. I don't think we should keep focusing on international tourists. Of course, yes, with the international tourists, they come with dollars, they come with euros. It's a lot of money when they come with it. But also, I think we should open hunting, especially for some species which we consider to be high in numbers. Open it to some locals, some local business people, so that they hunt as well. They have butcheries where they sell game meat. I mean, when I'm in 𝐓𝐴𝐴, there's that restaurant where you go and enjoy game meat, but it is not there in Botswana. That's what I'm trying to say. We need to diversify and we need to promote our own market here. Like somebody was saying, African governments, we spend a lot of money financing agriculture. They finance agriculture. Why can't we do the same when it comes to tourism, especially trophy hunting? Finance it the way we are financing agriculture. That is a way of diversifying. But while on that, I would not want to maybe forget to talk about the ban on trophy hunting itself. I think as Africans, especially countries which are affected by the large numbers of elephants and other animal species in South Africa, you know, wildlife is usually, is in game farms. So South Africa, they want to sell, they want trophy hunting. I think time has come, like I mentioned earlier on the issue of positive reporting on the media, so that we stand up and we really promote our business. We really counter what the animal rights groups are saying in the developed world, because they're negatively painting us as poachers or what. I think time has come for us to stand and really project that trophy hunting is done for the good of our economies and conservation as well. I'll stop so far.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I will also want to comment on it, but I see that there are a lot of questions that we have now from the audience. I'll read them and you can respond to them at random, but I think some of them are a bit more directed. The first question is, could growth in intra-African tourism also help to promote trade in wildlife products, for example, such as wild foods? I think this question could be directed to either Tadu or Joseph. You want to comment on that? I can repeat the question. Could
Repeat it, please.
growth in intra-African tourism also help to promote the trade in other wildlife products? For example, if we see the interaction of Africans going to Nigeria, for example, to view animals or to admire whatever different types of wildlife that is there, could we then maybe start to see exportation of biltong or or something, or dried meat going to South Africa, or can we start to see more honeyworms getting to that space of Africa? So that is the question. Could inter-Africa tourism also be a tool that can facilitate trade of other different wild food products?
Yes, I very much agree with the person who asked the question. For example, there's a lot of mopane worm which is being traded from Botswana to South Africa. And I'm told in South Africa, they use it to feed animals. I don't know whether it's true or not. It's the rainy season right now in Botswana. Very soon, bags and bags of mopane worms will be sent to South Africa. So this can be developed into a very good trade. Mopane worms can also be packaged and be eaten as a snack, sent to other African countries, whether it's feeding animals in South Africa or not, but can be a form of trade. So really, I support that. Not only mopane worms, a lot of bird products. Singapore, really, for example, that is devil's claw. We have devil's claw in Botswana, which is a medicinal plant. It can also, it's being packaged, of course, and it can be sold to other African countries. I know Germany has been buying that from us, but I think we can sell it to other African countries. So we can do a lot in that area. Thank you.
Thanks, Prof. I think if you see, I'm not sure if those that brought mopane worms in South Africa came for tourism or they came for something else. But of course, tourism is part of that connection that can also bring new products into the sector from other countries as well. But certainly, they don't use it to feed dogs. I can confirm that they eat it. I also eat it. I buy it. Thank you for that. And then now we have another question as well on the chat box. What about harmonization between the Africa Free Trade trade area and the CITES conservation for good implementation of wildlife economy? So the question is about what about harmonization between the Africa Free Trade area and the CITES and the conservation laws in general? How can we bring that harmonization to support wildlife economies? Is open to the floor for anyone to respond to that.
Well, maybe I should start.
Okay, you can go on.
All right, it's okay.
Yeah, you look at what
you can go on, Joseph. Over to you, Prof.
Yes, I was saying you look at what 𝐓𝐡𝐞 states are trying to do. The 𝐓𝐡𝐞 states, these are Botswana, Namibia, Angola, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. What these countries are simply saying is that we can have common laws when it comes to wildlife resources or natural resources in our region. They've defined a very big area and they call it 𝐓𝐶A, Transfrontier Conservation Area. And you look at what they are doing again, they patrol together the borders, that harmonization is very important. Earlier on, I mentioned Kenya, no trophy hunting. Tanzania, next door, there's trophy hunting. I think this is not okay. These two countries are neighbors. You also have all these wildebeest migrations from Tanzania, Kenya, So in Kenya, they're not hunted. In Tanzania, they're hunted. So we need to harmonize this and come up with laws which are supporting each other. Initially, or earlier in the morning, we talked about ECOWAS, we talked about SADC. So we need that harmonization within these zones. So it's very, very important because it's not only going to promote wildlife conservation, it's also going to promote the livelihoods of the local communities, the economies of the people living in those areas. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any takers again, Haley or Tatu, on that comment? In terms of harmonizing, how do we work around harmonizing all these different legislative instruments They could be regional, continental, or even international to support the wildlife business or wildlife enterprise. Over to you, 𝐓𝐿𝐴𝐧𝐬𝐿.
Wiseman, just to maybe add briefly on what Joseph has said, which I completely agree with, is that if we did see more harmonization between, countries around conservation law and, maybe the free trade agreement can kind of promote that harmonization as well, I think then we can also come to CITES with a more united front. Because I think, talking about harmonizing with CITES, I think, to be blunt, often the challenge is actually with CITES in that, there are many countries around the world that are telling African countries how to utilize their wildlife that, have no vested interest or understanding of, of those species. And so, but, as Joseph said, a challenge in Africa is that the countries themselves don't necessarily agree. So I do, and difference is also to be celebrated, but I think, something that promotes this harmonization between countries could actually be quite useful in better aligning some of the CITES regulations with what would be appropriate in those African countries.
Thank you so much, 𝐓𝐿𝐴. We also have another question from the chat, which says, how can cultural and traditional beliefs help in growing the game meat business in Africa? I think the question is open to the floor. How can we use the cultural and belief systems as a way to grow and support the game meat business in Africa? So we can be thinking about it in terms of the belief systems which are used, for example, for governance purposes. There are traditional practices that people used to follow in the past in terms of how you slaughter animals, how you take care of certain animals. For example, there are certain wild meat species which are said to be reserved for kings because it's a way to conserve them. There are certain animal species which are eaten in different seasons. So all those type of thinking or belief systems, how can they be used to support the game meat business or in general the whole wildlife economy? I just wanted to elaborate on it so that we can have a fruitful discussion. Over to you, colleagues. Any checkers for that question? Yes.
Yeah, let me take the first shot. Maybe historically, like here in the Buganda Kingdom, where I'm seated, that is in central Uganda, cultural beliefs and traditions, totems and taboos were majorly looked at as from the perspective of conserving or protecting wildlife. However, you realize that as society has evolved over time, you will find that people also practice what they can call subsistent hunting. And in the discussion, someone even rose, later on also, I was looking through the chat, someone was highlighting the issue of hunting with help of dogs. That has been persistent in some of our societies, especially in the countryside. And to be very honest, people are doing this for subsistence, survival, hunt animals, and maybe have something in terms of meat for their families. So now, when you cross across, actually, when you move across now in the DRC, there are very many wildlife species which are illegally hunted because of people's traditional beliefs, and these are fed on. And still, the market is, I can still say it is still a black market. There is no proper documentation of this. So now what would be important, like from the workshop of Dr. 𝐓𝐿𝐴, we need to liberalize, open up these markets, formalize them, give people licenses, educate them about maybe which species to hunt. Because this also speaks to the fact that I was in Kenya a few weeks ago. The reason why they stopped the sport hunting, they were saying sport hunting accelerates poaching. So here in Uganda, we have not had even, actually I can say in East Africa, we have not had enough studies which bring evidence that sport hunting, either traditionally or not traditionally, leads to maybe poaching. So we need this scientific evidence to support some of these issues. And for me, I think it is good to look into people's cultural attributes and try to put them alongside maybe the trade lanes to ensure that if so and so believes they can feed on this, then they can go and hunt it, but they are doing it legally. Because maybe also still speak on the traditional issues, some animals are basically killed because they are also considered as a bad omen. This is just a perception, okay? But where now here, I think there is a need to bring in the role of conservation education, change some of the perceptions of the communities, the traditional beliefs, especially some of those species which are just killed. They are killed, they are not fed on, but because someone believes that if an owl makes a sound on top of my house, a member of the family will die. So they will hunt all the owls wherever they are and kill them. So I don't know, but maybe you'll find that in some cultures, these birds are fed on. This also goes to reptiles. Now the issue is, what I can say on this particular question, we need to harmonize, we need to liberalize, and also educate the people, change their perception on some of these cultural attributes and try to formalize our business in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tatu. Ladies and gentlemen, yes, okay, you can add, Prof.
Yes, we usually say, for you to achieve conservation, you must try and incorporate indigenous knowledge and scientific knowledge and come up with a hybrid. You cannot come with your science and try and introduce it and, introduce it to a community and expect them to accept what you are saying. But you can sit them down, bring your science, let them bring their indigenous knowledge, and then you come up with a hybrid of this, and then you'll achieve conservation. Your science will be accepted by the communities because you are also accepting part of their indigenous knowledge. So it's just an incorporation of indigenous knowledge and science. You get a hybrid, and then you achieve your conservation and your improved livelihoods. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So you're advising us not to move too fast, but we should also take into consideration the local knowledge and systems that are practiced there and co-opt them into this system or into these agendas that we're trying to achieve. Now we are coming towards the end of this session. So I wanted to end the session by asking just one question each, and then you can just respond in a minute, because we're left with only about 4 minutes to conclude this session. So I'll start with you, Hayley. Looking into the wildlife economies, can you perhaps give examples of some successful wildlife enterprise models that have really achieved or promoted conservation and economic development, and what lessons could be learned from this? So you don't need to go deep into it, just give us some insights, maybe 1 or 2 wildlife enterprise models that have been successful, be it from a private sector or from community-owned conservancies or community entrepreneurs. Over to you, Hayley.
Yeah, thanks, Wiseman. I think coming back to a comment I made earlier in the day, I think when we look for successful examples, we often looked at these like fancy high-end ecotourism properties like Singita, etc. across the property that have done really well, and forget that there's enormous investment that goes into those. And for me, actually, the successful enterprises that I've seen, and a big wake-up call for me, has been those that actually do a much more of a mix of activities, often a much smaller property. So they do a bit of tourism, often local tourism. They do some maybe local and trophy hunting, and they sell a bit of meat locally, but also importantly, many of them actually still have livestock. And, the wildlife economy is still very volatile, speaking from a South African perspective. Game prices go up and down, whereas livestock is kind of a much more established sector. And so for me, in brief, I think one really successful model that we often overlook is the mixed model that appreciates that these are agroecological systems. They've got wildlife, but also more conventional forms of agriculture, and that should be celebrated.
Thanks so much, Haley, for those insights. And I've never really thought about the mixing that you're bringing in. I think it's something that we need to start looking into, or adopting these flexible different models and trying or doing a test, a retest type of approach in what we do. So thanks for those inputs. And then over to you, Dr. Tadu. I have a question. In what ways can the partnerships between governments, the private sector, NGOs, entities be fostered to support the growth of wildlife enterprises for both economic and conservation purposes? Let me know if the question is not clear. Over to you, Tadu, just a minute, and then we wrap up the session.
Yeah, it is okay. The question is clear for me. Let me take an example of Uganda. And yesterday happened to come across a letter where some tour agencies and operators actually are fighting against one another because they were called for a meeting. They signed for something different, but the petition was also presented in a different way. So now there is a need, first of all, to have full representation of the private sector on some of the key decision-making ministries, departments, and agencies of all governments. The private sector should be fully represented, they should be consulted, and they should be part of the decision-making processes. Because when you look at like the case here in Uganda, it is actually the private sector in form of tour operators, tour guides, and others who bring in business for the government, but the way how the decisions are made are top-down. So we are having issues of limited consultation of the private sector when it comes to issues of wildlife conservation and tourism here in Uganda, and I think even other parts of Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that brief note. Over to you, Prof. Joseph. I have a question for you. Looking into the trophy hunting or the hunting industry, what are the financing and investment options that are available for scaling up a wildlife enterprise? And also, how can entrepreneurs access such kind of resources? Are there opportunities for local participation or for even new entrants into the sector to participate in the hunting? And what are the financing or investment options that are available, and how can they be accessed?
Okay, no, thank you very much. In Botswana, there's what you call 𝐓𝐶EDA. 𝐓𝐶EDA is a government financial scheme which is meant to finance a number of projects, be they agriculture, be they tourism, and the rest. So I think African governments should look into how they can support the local businesses by coming up with financing schemes such as 𝐓𝐶EDA. There is also the National Development Bank in Botswana. That one is financing mostly agriculture. I think we should also diversify that into tourism and see how really tourism projects can be funded, including the trophy hunting industry. Thirdly, you look at who is doing business in Africa when it comes to trophy hunting. Mostly, these are companies from developed countries. Except maybe in South Africa. In South Africa, I think they've got very good local companies, South Africa and partly Namibia. But you look at what is happening in Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, most of these other African countries, you'll find that the majority of the safari trophy hunting companies are from Europe. You end up in a situation where the local communities are just selling animals. They're just landlords. They're selling animals without knowing even the value of the wildlife they're selling to these companies. It's like selling your house and you don't know the value of your house, or selling a car and you don't know the value. So that's what they are doing. So I think time has come that our governments should actually facilitate shareholding in some of these companies, so that when this European company comes or American company comes, they form a joint venture, a true joint venture kind of a partnership with the European or American companies so that they share profits, they share all the losses together. In so doing, we will promote our tourism industry. Believe me, the trophy hunting industry, the photographic tourism industry, these are high-end entities which actually generate billions and billions of dollars. So you can imagine the amount of money that will be left at a local level, that will be invested at a local level when that shareholding is promoted. So that is my position for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Joseph Mbaiwa. I wish we could go on with this discussion. Unfortunately, the cat has eaten our time. So we'll be now getting ready to go see our loved ones and also rest. I know I'm standing between you now and your loved ones. It's your time to go home and see them. Thank you very much, Dr. Haley, for coming to this panel. And also thank you very much, Dr. Tadu, for sharing insights from East Africa in Uganda there. And thank you very much again, Professor Joseph Mbaiwa in Botswana. Ladies and gentlemen, for any other comments that you might have or questions and queries you might have, please feel free to share those with us at 𝐓𝐡𝐞@san.ac.za. You can also contact us directly on that line. But for now, and me and the colleagues at 𝐓𝐡, thank you very much, and hope to see you soon in some of our conversations that we'll be having around the wildlife economies.